All right, we ready to get going here? All right, good evening and welcome to the Northwest Property Owners Alliance Candidate Forum. Our co-sponsors tonight are the Kootenai County Farm Bureau and the Coeur d'Alene Lake Shore Property Owners Association. Thank you all for coming. NWPOA Board Member Tim Kastning is going to open us in prayer.
Thank you and welcome for coming tonight. Thank you. Please stand and let's bow in prayer. Father, we're reminded in Scripture that we are to pray for those in authority. And Lord, we thank you for each one that's here tonight, for these that are seeking a seat in government and those that are representing us currently. And Lord, for all these that are in attendance to hear from these candidates, Lord, I pray that you would direct this meeting tonight. We pray that everything that is said would help us to make a decision on who we want representing us. So, Lord, we just turn this over to you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Tim. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Well, I'm Steve Adams. I'm your MC tonight. Our panelists tonight are from the NWPOA, Kimberly Tanner, from the Kootenai County Farm Bureau, Linda Ryder, and from the Coeur d'Alene Lake Shore Property Owners Association is Greg Delavan. Our timer is Miss Summer Bushnell with NWPOA. And first round will be the county commissioners. Tonight we have joining us on the end County Commissioner Mark Eberlein, Challenger Bill Brooks in District 1. In District 3 we have Commissioner Bob Bingham, Challenger Luke Summer, Leslie Duncan, and Bob Thornton and Russell McLean. Gentlemen, you will have 2 minutes. Welcome, commissioners, and you will have 2 minutes for your opening statements. And we will start with Commissioner Eberlein.
I'm going to start off with a little game over here.
Mark, could you speak into the microphone?
I will as soon as I get these up
Okay.
here. So can everybody see these? These are political campaign cards. Every single one of them says the same thing. I'm a Republican, I'm conservative, less taxes, less government, more personal responsibility, cut spending, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What does that mean? You'll find out what you get when they've been under fire. And that's the only time you'll find out what you've got. I'm going to drop a bombshell. If we had the ability at the county to knock off $2 to $4 million of taxpayer debt or payments or fees or tax dollars, should we do it? And what if it took a lot of fortitude to do it? Political courage is what's the hard thing to come by. So what if we privatized an entire Kootenai County department and managed that? Solid waste.
Thank you, Mark. Bill, you're up.
Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to thank the Northwest Property Owners for sponsoring this. Many of you know me as the consumer guy from the paper. Judging by a few calls I've received from people, many representing that they come from this group, I feel I need to let you know who I really am. I'm a professional administrator, a disabled veteran due to Agent Orange cancer connected to my service in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War. I have a Bachelor's of Science degree in Bayesian Analytical Statistics and Counseling from the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. While living in a remote village in Alaska, and that's where we all come from someplace. I come from Alaska. There was no government, there was no law, there was no written law at all. We had a neighbor, Herbie Nyakpuk, who would shoot a moose on his property and cut out the choice pieces and leave the rest to rot. It attracted Kodiak-sized brown bears, and it was dangerous. It was dangerous for the families who lived around Herbie. It was dangerous for the village. It was dangerous for the kids. He claimed he had property rights. His property rights made it dangerous for those around him and those who came after him. While I strongly support property rights are not absolute. Our rights must also take into consideration the safety and the rights and the welfare of our neighbors, their families, and our community. In that we haven't been given much of a time tonight, 2 minutes, I would challenge Mark to a one-on-one debate sponsored by a local group, moderated by a person that we agree on. In that we only have a few weeks until the election, I would ask Mark here and now if he would accept this challenge.
Oh, thank you, Bill. Commissioner Bingham, you are up.
Folks, pleasure to be here tonight. Glad that we have at least a decent-sized turnout. Government is only controlled by people who participate in it. So high five to all of you who showed up. Most of you know me. I can start right off saying that I'm the founder of NWPOA. Several years ago, I resigned from the board. But the reason I started NWPOA is because I didn't feel that we had representation in a lot of things that were changing in the county. So at that time, I began reviewing budgets and got involved, and that was 2012. I can still remember the date that I showed up to the first meeting to listen to a gentleman from Colorado tell me why he needed the double of regulations on my property. And so a lot has transpired in that time. I resisted running for government. Had people ask me to, and I said, no, I still don't like it. It's a lot of work if you take it seriously. And there's a lot of things that come before us. The thing that I live for is my faith and my family and my friends. And so politics is down on the list. So I try to keep that in proper balance. We have one adult child, my daughter Elizabeth. She's here tonight. She's going to push something out here, and I'll be a grandpa here shortly. So I don't know how that happened, but something happened there. So at any rate, when I founded NWPOA, literally I was invited to do town halls across the county. And so I started doing the town halls, and that's how, this whole thing with me got birthed. And so I've connected with a lot of folks, and I hope that I'm doing a reasonably good job. I'm giving it my full effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Luke, you're up, sir.
Thank you. Glad that you were able to attend tonight. Thank you for inviting us to this forum. My name is Luke Summer, and I am a candidate for the County Commission in District 3. I've been involved politically since I was young. My mother used to take me into the voting booth with her, and ran for the United States Congress, House of Representatives in 1988, was the Republican nominee in Silicon Valley, California District 13, but haven't run for public office since then. In the meantime, I have been the president of the Panhandle Pachyderm Club. I am a member of the National Association of Parliamentarians, have been since 2012. Very involved in process and policy and thinking about government and government-related issues. When it comes to self-governance here in this country, both on a federal, state level, or for that matter, on a county level, city level, self-governance means that we start with our own self-government and then our local communities as well. And we have a unique opportunity in this country to govern ourselves, unlike many places around the world, such as China and Russia, where they have presidents for life and other things. We do have the opportunity to make choices as to what we will do. On a county level, I think that there are just a few issues in particular that I think motivated me to get into this race. And one of them is the issue of the budget. And I would have been in favor of adopting a zero tax increase budget this last time around. I'm in favor of reconsidering the issues of the transit center, transitional housing, and that new financial analyst position. And I'm glad, Bob, that you're going to be a grandpa soon. That's very good.
Thank you, Luke. Leslie?
As the potential next Kootenai County Commissioner, I will make my decisions based on my principles of limited government, of obeying state statute and the Constitution, of asking, is this necessary? Who does it help? Who does it hurt? 80% of the commissioner's job is administrative, and my background, my work background, lends itself to that very well. 60% of our property tax dollars go directly to justice-related services. I was in law enforcement for 10 years, so I understand that part of it. On the Aquifer Protection District, I've been involved with the county budget cycle for 4 years now. And the last budget cycle, I was able to facilitate a fee decrease, even though the committee initially opposed me. So I gained support with people who not necessarily see my way first, but I can explain to them and gain cooperation with the people that I work with. And I did that in law enforcement quite a bit. So I would be proud to serve as your next Kootenai County Commissioner.
Thank you, Leslie. And Mr. Thornton, you are up.
My name is Bob Thornton. I'm going to give you a quick or we're going to do an overview of who I am and what I am. Brought my family up here in 1980, bought a piece of property out by Athol. I was a contractor at the time. I designed and built our house, and our house is on the same property it was 38 years ago. I've been very active in the Boy Scouts, 4-H, Volunteer Fire Service. I was the first fire chief and trainer for the Bayview Fire Protection District. I helped start the arson investigation units in the Northwest. If you're looking for someone that has a fresh outlook and experience to run business, that's me. I'm a retired Master Sergeant. I spent 22 years in the service, 11 years in the Air Force and 11 years in the Army. My 11 years in the Air Force, I was a management analyst, and basically I know how to run a business and how to do funding and management skills. I encourage you, if you're looking for someone with a fresh outlook, to consider me, and thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Mr. McLean, you are up.
Hi, Russell McLean. You quit laughing at me. Well, I do everything to full effort. I always do what's best and do what's right. And blowing smoke isn't what I do, so let's just get to questions.
Thank you, Russell. All right, on to the questions. So here's how it's going to go. Each panel member is going to ask a question from their respective organizations, and then we'll take some questions from the audience, and then if we still have time, we'll give you a chance for some closing statements. So we're going to start with Kim.
Thank you all for coming tonight. We appreciate you joining us for this and informing our audience on how you stand on these questions. The Northwest Property Owners Alliance would like to know where each of you stand on the building codes. If elected, will you continue rolling them back, or will you go back to the status quo of the International Code Council?
Why don't we start down with Mr. McLean?
Well, I have my opinions. I think the building codes are probably a proper thing, but it's pretty controversial, especially this group here. I think it should be like with McEwen Park, and it should go to a public vote and let the voters decide, and not 2 county commissioners.
One of the things I'd really like to educate the people in this room, I don't know how many of you are aware, there's 25,000 building lots in Kootenai County. That's 50% of the land mass. So if people think that this opting out doesn't affect everybody, you're wrong.
I think when a government entity has a monopoly on plan review and inspections, I think that causes a problem for property owners. So I would like to see private plan review and private inspectors help homeowners in that, if that's what they want to do. I believe that the small change that was made affecting, the rural county, I think that's a step in the right direction. So I would like to see what happens in the next 10 months and make further decisions based on that.
I think it's a step in the right direction. I will review the actual decision that was made as it becomes available. To have this change that was put forward at the Kroc Center on the 19th, I think was something that was necessary, and I think that the arguments against it lack merit.
Well, I wrote the dang thing, so so obviously I think it's a good idea, and this is our second forum, and I mentioned this at another forum. Mark was holding up the flashcards about, everybody says they're conservative and less regulation and smaller taxes, et cetera, et cetera. And no matter who gets elected, they're gonna spend months getting their feet wet, learning what's going on and perhaps being overwhelmed. But strategically, reducing regulation takes time, and even our president is finding that things don't just happen overnight. And so I do believe this is going to be very beneficial, and so obviously I support it.
I would immediately go back to the way it was and start a new process involving people by agreeing on a definition and then agreeing on what the problems are in terms of efficiency and costs, and then working together to fashion a solution that would fit and we could move forward with. I think it's good that the county got a good slap in the face as far as how onerous some of these codes were. It's not good, to use an old hard cliche, to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And they did. Let's go back, let's start over, let's do it right, let's do it together. That's the kind of county Kootenai County is. We're not a county at war with each other.
And I helped rewrite that code to where it was palatable. I find it fascinating that the biggest opposition comes from those who benefit from the code. The realtors, the builders, the county building officials. It makes the bank's job easier. It makes the insurance job easier. That is not what government is supposed to be used for. There's a whole long line of stuff out there that proves that all that building codes does is take the responsibility away from those who built the house, those who inspected the house, and it dumps it right back onto the back of the homeowners. It's called the sovereign right of the king. You can't sue the king. And the king says it's built correctly, and therefore you're out of luck.
All right, thank you, commissioners. I am impressed with your brief, concise answers. Like, you guys are seasoned pros at this. This is great. All right, next up we have from the Kootenai County Farm Bureau, Linda Ryder.
Welcome all you guys, thanks for coming. As our population grows, our housing needs also increase. One of the attractants to this area is that we have open space. However, as we see a continuous development of farmlands into subdivisions and open mountainous forest lands into ranchettes, we are losing that open space. What do you see as the biggest problems and the biggest gains in this transition?
All right, we'll start down here with Commissioner Eberline.
My great uncle came through here in 1842. He beat Father de Smet here. My great grandfather came through Idaho in 1846 as a baby. There's been a couple changes since that point in time in the state of Idaho. I happen to be a Native American, and at least a portion of it. There's been changes, and people are going to keep moving here. So there is going to continue to be changes. We talk about open space. We have 61% of Idaho is federally owned open space. You have land use codes, planning and zoning, And the design of those is to keep it to where you have a proper parcel size for where it's at. So you're out there in the agricultural part of the world, you don't get to break it into little bitty pieces. When you're down here on the prairie, you do get to break it into little bitty pieces, sometimes, as long as it's not over the aquifer.
And Bill, before you start, just so you all know, I'm sorry if I didn't explain the timer. When you see that yellow card goes up, you got 15 seconds. That's correct. Cork on red.
Okay, we are going to have development here. We are going to have influx of people, whether we like it or not. Many people in this room are from California. I welcome immigrants as long as they come here legally and they speak English and they want to belong to our culture. I am not in favor of immigrants who come here and want to speak another language, or immigrants who come here and want to bring their culture from a failed state here, and there are many. There are many people here who actually have overreacted to the, what I call the socialist state of California. That is not who we are as overreactors. We work together, and we can do that, and we can make our growth good growth, consistent growth. And it'll be good for the county and good for the people who live here.
Thank you for that question. You know, this county is like a good portion of the United States as far as a lot of people are leaving some states and coming into other states, and we're certainly one of them. In 1991, we were approximately 75,000. By the end of 2015, we were 150,000. Do the math, we doubled in population in that size. Okay, so 2015, 150,000. In roughly 25 years, we're going to be 300,000. And I didn't say that to scare you. That's just the way it looks, and that's based on history. And so part of what we have to do is certainly manage our growth. We have a 5-acre minimum in the rural area. I'm fine with that minimum. I hope most of these people that come are city slickers, and that's where they want to live, so that I can keep, you know, my space out where I live. But I also have to support the farmer's right to sell a portion of his land. If the farmer needs money, and that's where his investment is, he needs to be able to unload it.
Thank you, Bob.
Growth is inevitable. That's true, especially when you live in a desirable area such as Kootenai County. The 5-acre minimum, I think, is a good standard that we've got. We've got good rules in place by and large in this county, and I think that as long as we're abiding by the rules, following them, and at the same time protecting property rights and the right of landowners to do as they can and as they will with their property, that the county can move forward. The desire of some to keep it so that it doesn't change at all, I think, is unrealistic, because that will happen as it has happened, as we heard from Mark, from the 1800s to the present day. But change needs to take place with the consent of the community, with the consent of the governed. And we do live in a place, fortunately, where the consent of the governed is required.
It is true, growth is inevitable. I would love to see us grow business before we grow homes. I would love to see a lot of open space remain that way. And being over the aquifer, that's a very important resource that we all benefit from. So I'd like to see the 5-acre minimum over the aquifer stay in place. And I'd like to see, you know, a lot of the agricultural areas, you know, remain viable as well. But bottom line, I mean, like it was said, if it's somebody's investment, then they should be able to have a way to capitalize on their investment without violating current zoning laws.
Okay, let me say to begin with, I'm not a politician. I'm not against growth. I am concerned about structure in our county, and I want to make sure that that is done properly. We need to balance residential with industrial. It's important to have our byways and our egress and ingress systems to, balanced against our recreational programs. And I just think it's very important that we maintain a balanced structure so that everybody in the county can have a decent life.
This is a good question. Thank you very much. You know, I've been here my whole life, and all you people have come here and come here and come here, and all it's done is cost me money. Everything costs more money. Growth does not pay for itself. You know, years ago, I had a talk with Jack Cotton, and this had to be 25 years ago, about making slow growth initiatives in Kootenai County. You know, our schools are getting hammered. You know, they got thousands of kids. You know, people are coming here in this conservative movement, and they want every service they had. They don't want to pay for it, and the conservative value says they don't have to. So until the state can give us some tools to help growth pay for itself, I don't want to see any more.
All right, thank you all. Next question will come from the Coeur d'Alene Lakeshore Property Owners Association, President Greg Delavan.
I'm going to change it up just a little bit and get away from the direct business of the county and talk about something that's just a little bit more global. We as an organization at the Coeur d'Alene Lakeshore Property Owners Association have joined Northwest Property Owners Association and the state of Idaho and some others in defense of our water rights. And you guys will be, as commissioners, you'll be tasked with having to comment on some of these things. And I was, the county commission was very involved in the lake management plan a few years ago, and this is the kind of thing that goes just a little bit beyond the day-to-day management. But my question for you is what do you know about the North Idaho water adjudication? And it's a three-part question. The second part is, do you know who the opposition is to the state of Idaho and the locals in this effort? And do you know what it means if the opposition is successful and we're not successful in defending the state of Idaho's right to purvey the water for us?
Thank you, Greg. Russell, we're coming back this way.
All right, here's a humdinger of one. I know who the opposition is, I'm well aware. I know their environmental concerns. I know what'll happen if things go awry. Everybody's kind of got to get along on this one and come with a reasonable solution, because they've got a lot more money than we do, okay? You know, environment's an important thing to me. And the thing I find interesting, I've made meetings with everybody under the sun. The tribe, the Coeur d'Alene tribe, wouldn't even return a phone call. I tried 10 times to 6 different people, and I couldn't get a response. Someone's been kind of picking on them a little hard. And that's not how we do things. You gotta get in there, and some people are gonna be mad, and some people, it's just how it works. But they've got more money than we do.
And I'll be honest, I don't have the information you're asking for, but I will have it by next week.
I am somewhat aware of it, whereas Aquifer Protection District actually is tasked with water quality, and so the water quantity issue and the rights don't directly relate to us. But I've been very proud of the NWPOA's efforts and the citizens behind them who are keeping us informed and fighting for our rights. And I'm very happy about that. And we do have a formidable opponent, and we just have to remain involved and make sure that the water rights remain fair and just.
I became aware of this issue probably in about 2010 and 2011 when Craig, and I forget his last name, spoke at the Panhandle Pachyderm Club and brought the issue to the forefront. And the water rights for Idahoans should belong to Idahoans. We should have the first right of refusal on our water issues, and yet we're captured by either the tribe or Washington State. And that, I think, puts us at risk. We need to fight and maintain those rights because they come to us from God because of where we live geographically, and it should be ours first rather than anyone else's.
Well, yeah, I'm pretty familiar with the water rights issue. NWPOA joined with several other groups and hired an attorney to represent citizens who filed an objection. And, you know, this all began with the tribe, and this is happening across the United States, and it's actually, there's a global effort by globalists who are wanting to return things to the indigenous people. And, you know, that's a whole much deeper topic, but what's at stake is whether or not we get to have water. And over in Washington State, they're wrestling with this now. In a county that my wife and I moved from, there was a lawsuit, and basically all development has stopped. So water is like the new gold, so it's vitally important. We have to be on top of this. I did approach a prior board, not the one that Mark was on, but the one before that, to get involved, and they thought it didn't affect them. And by the way, it's not just the tribe. Washington State wants 2 to 3 times the water we're sending them already.
Thank you, Bob.
A comment about water becoming like gold will be more and more true as time goes on. I lived on a lake, and I hate to keep going back to Alaska. It was 100 miles long and 50 miles wide. We had beluga whales and freshwater seals in it. And the Indians, 49 of them, owned it. It was not proportional, and it's not proportional here. The tribes will, if given the opportunity, take as much as they're allowed to take in terms of rights to the water in this area. And there has to be a balance, and we have to stand up, and we have to stand up together. They have casinos that generate cash, which generates lawyers. So it's important that we understand what we're dealing with. No one property owner or one small group can challenge, let alone win, on any kind of water rights issue in this area unless we do it together.
Thank you, Bill.
Divide and conquer, Sun Tzu. The tribe isn't our enemy. It's the federal government. The tribe sits on the tip of their finger and they push them into this battle. I've sit in on virtually every one of these meetings when the lawyers are up there discussing our options. There's more than enough water to go around for everybody. The tribes didn't start this battle, it was the federal government. Make no mistake. Some of them, they love it because they're going to benefit from it. It's divide and conquer, pit us against each other, divide all of our different groups up in little pieces, and you'll kill us. A success that we just had recently in the Basin Commission is $14 million is going to be taken out of a Hecla settlement fund of $140 million, and they were going to give $14 million to the tribe, and they wanted to go buy property at the head of Hangman Creek, which doesn't drain into the Coeur d'Alene Basin, and it's a violation of the judge's consent decree. We stopped it. 15 county commissioners signed that and stopped it dead and cold, and now they only get 5%. Just keep fighting.
Thank you, Mark. All right. Well, thank you, panelists, for bringing those questions from the organizations. And now we're going to go to questions from the audience. And Kimberly, you are up.
This is a 2-part question. Would you support hiring a county manager or a financial manager, and would it be fiscally responsible?
Mark, we're going back down this way.
That's a difficult question, I'll tell you why, because it's illegal. You think you're going to get a county manager, well, we already have one, her name's Nancy Jones. She sits in her office and she does everything she can do. You're going to take, there's 2 forms of government. You can do the commission executive, or you can do the commission manager. If you adopt either one of those 2 forms of government, which is allowable since 1995 or 96, the responsibility of signing all the boring documents and dealing with the day-to-day administration can fall to either the manager or the executive. Sans that change of government, you just put another highly paid individual in the office that can't do anything other than Nancy Jones can currently do.
My position is we don't have one county commissioner on the commissioner today who's qualified to manage a county that is this complicated with this much money at stake and the issues at stake. We need either up our game in terms of the expertise of the commissioners, or we need to rely on people who are specifically trained to manage a county. And there are people who have masters and PhDs and 20 years of experience in managing counties all around this country. We can't use hardware store guys and pizza people and people who have never had a job that paid this much money to manage this county. It's too complex. It will end in disaster.
I've never sold pizza, so I missed that one. Surprised I missed the list. You know, there's a wrong narrative going around about this. This is a position that I literally pushed for and sought early on. And you don't have to talk to 2 people in the whole county. There's about 800 employees. The commissioners are a revolving door. We come and go. 2 years, 4 years, you're in and out, and it's a revolving door. One of the things I first asked for when I came in is, where's the 5-year plan? Guess what? There isn't one. We need something that brings consistency. The position that Chris and I voted for is called a senior business analyst. It is not a county manager, it's not a county administrator, it's an employee. But an employee whose purpose is to be there to support the commissioners in the revolving door, to get a plan created so that we're spending your tax money wisely, not just year to year.
No and no, I wouldn't support the position. I don't think it's necessary. I think the county clerk's office is doing the job, and the financial analysts that we've got already are performing that function quite well.
I want to clarify, are we talking about a manager or the financial analyst position? Okay. Okay. Yeah, I don't support the position. I understand the reasoning behind it, but it's another $80,000 built out that is already, the job's already being done by other elected officials. And we do have a really good, because I'm with APD, it's like they're my support staff too. So the ladies on the 3rd floor do a really good job, and they provide consistency year after year. But no, I would not support the financial analyst position.
I believe there's enough expertise in this county to do a good job and run it well. What I think that we really need to do is to get commissioners that know how to run the business of the county and do the financial and management decisions.
Well, I think maybe that it's kind of a half good idea and kind of a half bad idea. I know there needs to be somebody to drive for businesses to come here. And the county commissioners are way too busy. There's too many phone calls, too many meetings. There has to be somebody there to import businesses. There's got to be a broker somewhere. Now, whether it's a county employee or a private agency, I don't know. But there has to be someone there somewhere.
Keep that mic, Russell. You're going to answer and start on the next question, presented by Mrs. Ryder.
So this is a kind of a passion dear to my heart, but as a component unit, the Kootenai County Fairgrounds and North Idaho State Fair has a unique relationship with the county and the county commissioners. Less than 10% of their budget comes from the public taxing funds, and the for-profit business of the fair is run by a volunteer administrative board and their hired staff. The Fair Board has identified the need for a new multi-purpose building on the fairgrounds for the community to use. At fair time, a bigger building is needed to house the 4-H animals, and just in the past 3 weeks alone, events have been held on the fairgrounds that really needed a larger building. What are your thoughts of the future of the fairgrounds?
Well, it's the old airport, and all the buildings are kind of beat up, run down. I do love 4-H. When it comes to environment, animals, and that, I'm a total hippie. I'll come straight up. Making it bigger, I'd like to see the county I don't remember what they call that, the plant people that are over there at the coroner's office, extension, that's what they're called. I'd like to see them moved in there. As far as spending piles and piles of money, I don't know. I think that's another one for a public vote, you know, and let the taxpayers decide if they want to make it a fancy place or move it elsewhere and sell the property.
I'm certainly willing to look at expansion, and I understand the growth that's going on in this county. And I was a 4-H leader, but I certainly couldn't make an educated decision at this moment.
I'm definitely in favor of the fair and the fairgrounds. I would like to see a proposal come forward that doesn't further burden the taxpayers. If it can be done outside of additional taxpayer dollars, then I would like to consider that.
The fairgrounds are, of course, a local benefit to our community, for sure. But I think that the question has to be, who's going to pay for what? And what are we actually going to do with the fairgrounds? I haven't studied it enough to really make a decision at this point in time.
The fairground is run by a great group of people. Stubborn as all get out, but they're really good people. And they care very deeply about the fairgrounds, and their heart's in it. And it's the kind of people that we need on all of our committees. They're totally invested. If we had a larger building, such as an arena, the fair could become much larger. People, if you're not familiar with the statistics, several years ago we had about 74,000 come to the fair over Fair Week, over a 5-day period. Bounced up to 84,000. Last year I think we're about 85 or so, or 75 or so. Do the math, growth, right? 25 years it doubles. Can we have that many people on Government Way? Help me convince Linda and the other stubborn fair board members we got to move the fair to a bigger place and get an arena.
The fair is one of the things that makes North Idaho really a unique place. We have something that very few people in the country have, is a local fair. My wife and I go every single year and just love it. It needs a good, comprehensive plan to expand it appropriately, and it needs the funding to do so, and the dedicated people who are on that board don't want to see that collapse because we spent too much here and too much there. One building at a time is not the way to do this. A comprehensive plan, given what we know from projections, population growth, is the proper way to do this. And I'd be totally in favor of that. And I think it also would be, if we did it right, self-supporting or very close to it.
I would agree with you on something, believe it or not. I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus, but we've had some struggles. There's tax dollars. I'm not interested in raising property taxes. If somebody wanted to do a bond and the voters passed it, that'd be fine. I'm not sure. My personal thoughts, I don't like the concept of moving the fairgrounds. And Bob, or excuse me, Bill, in this part of the world, unlike California, there's lots of fairgrounds up here. It's normal in the county. I like it right where it's at because it's in the heart of the city and people remember their agrarian roots, to steal a phrase from Fidel Castro. If you go to Spokane, the fairgrounds isn't out in the sticks. If you go over to Puyallup, the fairgrounds isn't out in the sticks.
Thank you, Mark. All right, everybody, we've got about 10 minutes left here, so I'll leave it up to the panel, to the candidates. We could either take 1 minute and you guys could give closing remarks, or we could do one more question. What do you all think? Audience? Okay, one more question, and we're going to forego closing remarks. And who's got the question? Kim.
Having taken the first step toward reducing government overreach by eliminating residential building codes, what do you see as the next steps to reducing taxes and regulations?
Commissioner Eberline, you are up.
What do we do to reduce taxes and regulation?
What do you see as the next steps to reducing taxes and regulations, having already taken the first steps towards reducing government overreach by eliminating residential building codes?
Well, I mentioned the transit system. We all appreciate garbage service. If you're going to cut government, you have to do something. You have to reduce something. I've got reason to believe that the transit system could, or not transit, but solid waste could be operated at 20% reduction, $2 to $4 million by privatizing it, and receive the same service we have today. That would drop it. When I first got here, it was $10.5 to $11 million was their average operating budget. This year, we're seeing a $12.5 million operating budget. That budget could be reduced, which reduces your $93 fee that you're paying each year for your garbage service. That's a start.
Correction, I am not, nor have I ever been from California. It's very important that we be consistent and have the courage of our convictions. When we do what we just did as far as gutting the building codes in the rural parts of the city, let's get rid of the electrical codes, the plumbing codes, the mechanical codes. Why not? Isn't that freedom? That's ridiculous. Nobody would recommend that. But yet we take the first step, and next thing will be no zoning. So you have your nice house in Kootenai County, you may have a pig farm next to it. So let's be consistent. Let's take it one step at a time. Let's work together. Let's fashion a solution that benefits us all as residents of Kootenai County.
Good question. Thank you for that. It seems like all of these have been great questions, so thank you to the audience. I would like to make the land use code more concise. It's several hundred pages all by itself. Preserving all of the zoning districts. 2 years ago, I had some radicals running around saying I want to get rid of zoning. That's not true. Never been anything that I cared to do. But we can make it less burdensome. When it comes to taxes, one way we can greatly improve this is for every dollar in tax that a residence pays, it costs in round numbers $1.30 to service it between all the taxing districts. Commercial takes about 30 to 40 cents to service it. And so one of the things we're pushing for is to get our economic development folks to bring in commercial development like a server farm. Not a lot of employees, but a lot of taxes and not a lot of service required.
I think we've all experienced the tyranny of the experts and the tyranny of regulation. And this goes back to Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, and the United Nations, and everyone's love, not everyone, because we don't love it, but the people who love to make our society more complex, zoning codes, building codes, and a whole host of other issues, they just become more and more complex each and every year as time goes on. And we need to really start to think about how to reverse that process, not just stall it, not just slow it down, but to reverse it. I like Mark's idea, and I've been thinking about this too with the solid waste disposal system and possibly privatizing some of those elements there, and I think that the savings could be in part there. I'm in favor of zero tax increase, 0% tax increases, but part of my goal is to not just slow it down and stop it, but to begin to reverse it and let people make their own decisions where possible, where advisable. We don't need other people telling us exactly where we should live and how we should live.
The role of government is to protect life, liberty, and property. It's not for the management of our lives. When government oversteps that bounds, it results in over-taxation and over-regulation. So It's a two-part question. We have statutes that we have to provide services for, like the jail, the court system, the sheriff, things of that nature. So there's going to be some times where 0% is not possible. But wherever possible, I'm going to find that way, and I'm going to vote for a 0% tax increase. Anything that is not statute required, that is not necessary in the county, that can be privatized in the county, which there's not only solid waste, but probably another department that can go right along that way. I'm in favor of that, and that's what I'm going to be looking for. And as far as getting rid of some of the regulations with the opt-out process, I think there's more that we can do there. But I personally would like to see the 10 months go by and make that decision then.
My personal belief is this opting out was an overreaction to a small problem. I do believe that as a group of individuals, and I would represent everybody in this county, not just Republican or Democrat, that's the job of the commissioner. We certainly should look at our building codes, and if there's something that we need to discuss, we need to do that and do it but legally. That's all I have.
Can you repeat the question, please? It gets a little dizzy at this end of the line.
Sorry, I have a pile.
That's all right. Take your time. I thought it had to do with taxes and regulations.
It does. Having taken the first step toward reducing government overreach by eliminating residential building codes, what do you see as the next steps to reducing taxes and regulations?
Well, I don't know much about regulation. All I know is all you people moved here and brought them all on me. What you guys are asking for is something that we used to have. Everything was just a handshake society. It's a good place back then. But I think the very first place we have to look at is the jail. That is the biggest chunk of our budget. And at any given time, 1/3 of the inmates in Kootenai County Jail after sobriety are mental health. And 1/3 of those are post 9/11 veterans. Okay, our country put their brains in that shape. We know we got to look out for these kids. We have got to get the mental health out of the jail first and foremost. That's the biggest. It's not only a waste of taxpayer dollars, but there's no clinical help for these people, especially our vets. Our country did that to them. Now we got to pay close attention. Regulations, they just come with people.
Commissioner candidates, thank you all very much for coming out tonight. Thank you for your great answers, and thank you that I did not have to tell one of you to shut up not one time. Round of applause. Just so everybody knows, the Northwest Property Owners Alliance membership is free. So out in the lobby, there are cards where you could put your name and address and email and whatever other contact information you'd like to. And you could become a member of the Northwest Property Owners Alliance and get updates via email. And of course, we never turn down a generous offer. All right, if everybody would like to please make their way to their seats, we'll get going with our legislators, the legislative candidates. I'd like to take this time to thank Pastor Paul Van Noy and Candlelight Christian Fellowship for providing this wonderful venue. These guys are awesome. They set up, they film, they give us sound, and it's just a beautiful facility. So thank you so much. All right, are we about ready to get rolling here? All right, round two. We have some legislators, candidates, current elected officials. I'll start down here. We have John Green, Vito Barbieri, Mary Souza, Doug Akunowitz, Tony Vishneski, Kathy Sims, Roger Garlock, and Fritz Wiedenhoff. And we're going to have the same format. You will have 2 minutes for your opening comments. And I had thought about this with the commissioners, but I thought it would make it harder on myself. But one of the audience members said I should start in the middle and work our way back down for some of this. So, Doug, I know the mic just got taken away from me there, but pass Doug back down the mic, and we're going to mix it up a little bit with the legislators. Doug Okunowitz.
Good evening. My name is Doug Okonowitz, and hopefully by now most of you know me as Doug O. I'm running for Legislative District 2, seat B. Is that? 2B. Yes, sir. You need it closer or farther? Sounds loud to me. All right. I fully support the Idaho Republican Party platform, and to that end, I'm pro-life, pro-business. I'm also an NRA member. I'm a competitive shooter, and I venture to guess that I'm probably the only person running for office in the state that actually buys ammunition by the pallet. So I'm also a pro-Second Amendment person as well. I absolutely believe that Idaho can be the best manager of federal lands that are within our borders. I think it's imperative that we preserve and protect our water and property rights. I've been active in the community and community service in our area for as long as I've lived here. In fact, within the last month or so, the nonprofit foundation that I run recently surpassed $1 million in contributions to local charities. Not everybody in Idaho has the ability to move to Boise for 3 months a year, and but I think our founding fathers would suggest that if you can, you should run for office. That's a duty. I think it's a duty for those who can do it. Now, I've never run for office before, and my job of 24 years, however, does afford me the flexibility to run now. So I have no aspirations for higher office. I already have a job and I have benefits. I'm not trying to be somebody because it's not about me. It's about you. It's about us. And I think it's about trying to do the right thing and preserve the North Idaho we all love for our children and for their future. So thank you for coming tonight, and I appreciate your consideration on May 15th.
All right, thank you, Doug. Let's go to Mary, District 4 Senator Mary Souza.
Hi, thank you for being here. I'm Mary Souza, and I'm the senator from District 4, which is Coeur d'Alene. I'm just finishing my 4th year, my 2nd term in the Senate, and I really would like to thank all of you for the honor of representing Coeur d'Alene in the Senate. It's been a wonderful experience. Let me tell you that this session, out of the 4 that I've been part of, started out faster and with more energy than any of the others. I think there's change in the air. We all know that we have a new administration coming next year, and there's just been a sense of working toward change. What I do want you to know is that in the legislature, we looked at more than 640 bills were introduced into the process, and just over 400 actually passed through the House and the Senate. So over 74 days, we had eyes on 400 bills. You can imagine the amount of time and energy that takes. Let me just tell you a little bit about some of the bills you might be interested in. Speaking of taxes, from the commissioners' panel up here a few moments ago, the state of Idaho just sent you all back $100 million in your taxes. The reason that that happened is because the federal government's changes to the tax code would have caused all of the people in Idaho to have to collectively pay an additional $100 million, and our revenues were up. So what we did as a legislature is voted in favor of giving you back the $100 million to make it even with the federal government changes, and then we gave you another $100 million as an additional tax deduction. But also, we increased the child credit because the federal changes removed the child credit. So all of the families will be treated fairly.
Your time is
Just
up.
finishing my sentence, Steve.
Wasn't sure there.
Told ya.
Mary's challenger for District 4 Senate is Michael Pereira. He was invited and was not able to attend tonight. Next up, we have District 2A, Representative Vito Barbieri.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you all for being here. I've been 8 years now, running down to Boise for the winter. 4 of those years have been chairman of business, where we take care of insurance issues and licensing issues. When I first ran back in 2010, I was asked by a reporter about, what I expected to accomplish, and we rattled off the less regulations, less taxes, limited government, those things that Republicans generally say. And she said, we hear that from all the Republicans. What makes you different? And well, wait a second. I'm going to do this. Well, it took me until 7 years before I could figure out where the ropes were in Boise and how to pull them. This year, I started an interim committee that will report to the chairman of the Senate Commerce and me as chairman of business. And we're going to begin to examine all of the rules and regulations of the licensing boards. We're going to begin to examine them to see if we can streamline them. We're going to see of the anti-competitive nature that they are and see if we can't eliminate them. And we're going to generally look at eliminating and streamlining all of the licensing rules and regulations for each of the boards. They're welcoming this. They're saying this is a great exercise. So that is going to be, there's 30 different licensing boards and couple hundred actual licenses. But this year alone, I was able to resist licensing in the barber and cosmetology area. And we consolidated those 2 boards, so we're able to save some money there. And now we're going to begin to address those rules and regulations across the board. So finally, Republicans are taking the steps of reducing regulations. It takes time, it takes patience, but we're going to do that. Thank you.
From District 2B. Says it's on, okay, District 2B, Representative Candidate John Green.
Good evening. Thanks for coming, everyone. There are a lot of familiar faces here. I've run for public office in this county before. I'm probably unique in the fact that for a lawyer, I rarely give a lawyer's answer. I answer questions. Some people like that, some people don't. Sometimes some of my supporters say, well, maybe just answer a lawyer question once in a while so people don't know what you really think. Well, that's part of the problem with our political process today. Commissioner Eberlein brought up a very good point. He said everybody's going to say they're pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, pro-liberty, pro. You cannot win an election in this county if you're not running as a Republican and you're not willing to at least say that you're pro-life, pro-Second Amendment. But how do we distinguish from candidate to candidate? Not just in my race, but in all of the races. We have some very important decisions to make this election cycle, very important offices that are up for grabs. That are going to really affect the direction of not just our county, but of our state. Well, the way I suggest people do it is look at the person's life experience and see where they've been, what they've done in their life, in their career path. My career path has been pretty much a public record. I started out in law enforcement. I was a peace officer for 10 years. I actually went to the police academy before I was even old enough to be commissioned as a peace officer. Matter of fact, some of you may have heard this story. When I was commissioned as a peace officer, at 19 years old, I wasn't even old enough to buy a firearm and ammunition. My wife used to have to go to the range with me to make the purchase so that I could actually shoot at the range. But I'm a lawyer. My law career has been dedicated to people issues. In the last, since 1993, I have given several thousand hours of my time to people at no cost who are being oppressed by their government, most notably in the area of assault by the Internal Revenue Service. I'm going to continue that with my voting, the way I'll vote down in Boise.
Thank you, John. Next up, we have District 3B Representative Candidate Tony W. Wisniewski.
My name is Tony Wisniewski. I'm running for Representative Seat 3B. I want to thank you all for inviting us to speak here today. I'm an engineer and I moved here from Colorado because a company that I worked for, a multinational, laid off 1,200 people in one day and shipped the production to Malaysia. So I firmly support Donald Trump's move to change the unfair trade agreements that we've had for 30 years, GATT, NAFTA, WTO, and all the others, into a more level playing field. And so I support his movement to get our manufacturing jobs back here onshore. We have to do that if we're going to become a prosperous country. I'd like to briefly touch on some of my principles that I consider to be important. The first is supporting the primary role of government, and that is to protect its citizens, especially the unborn. Healthcare reform is vitally important to all of us. By design, the Obamacare system basically gutted our medical system. It's turned it into a total chaotic system. Insurance companies have caused the rates to go through the roof. We've got to get the doctor-patient relationship back into a primary consideration as opposed to government red tape and the insurance companies. I will support educational choice for families to get their children into whatever type of educational facility and educational climate is best for their children. I'm very supportive of vocational and technical education, and I currently serve on a advisory board for the Career and Technical Education group. I strongly support the Second Amendment for personal reasons. My father fought against the Nazis in World War II, and Poland was not able to successfully resist the communists from taking over after the war due to the Germans disarming the country.
Thank you, Tony. And also in District 3B, Kathy Sims.
Thank you very much. My name is Kathy Sims, and I have served now 1 term in the Senate and 3 terms in the House. So I think for sure when you're voting this year, you want to know what you're going to get. And so I have a voting record, a solid 10% of the top in the legislature for 8 years. In addition to that, I also received the 2016 Idaho Freedom Foundation Legacy of Freedom Award. So I was quite proud of that. It's very important for you to know what a voting record is. And the Idaho Freedom Foundation scores everyone that's down there on do they make government larger and do they raise taxes. I was proud to vote that it takes 2/3 majority to raise your taxes. And so part of what I do when I'm in Boise is not just make laws. Everybody down there, like Mary says, has another law that they'd like. But I'm here to tell you that I go there to make sure bad laws don't pass. And I think that's as critical as anything. I'm a business person and have been in business here and hired hundreds of people in Coeur d'Alene. So this is my 49th year. And proud to be part of the community, and I'm running for the seat in Post Falls.
Thank you, Kathy. Next up, we have in District 4B, Representative Roger Garlock.
Thank you. My name's Roger Garlock. I'm running for 4B right here in Coeur d'Alene. I'm a political newcomer, as a lot of individuals know that I've met throughout this process. I left politics 23 years ago when I served on student body council in my high school. And so I came back to it just recently. It was a tough decision, but I felt it was a very important decision. And I want to bring back that concept of citizen servant that we've lost in our nation and as our founders intended. It's our duty to serve and go down to Boise or whatever capital it may be and come home and live within your community and support your community. I've lived in Coeur d'Alene for the last 15 years, and I've served the community in many ways, through my job, through volunteering, through my church, and now I want to take that same passion and dedication down to Boise and support Idaho. I moved here 15 years ago by way of a couple other mountain states, Wyoming, Oregon, and I love it here. This is where I'm raising my children and my family, and I love the community of Idaho, and I want to preserve it as Idaho and let it be its individual state. And we don't need to homogenize all our states. And so, the word representative is one of the things that stood out to me, which is why I wanted to run. I feel like I'm a great representative of the citizens of Idaho. I'm a middle class, I'm a Christian, I'm a father, I'm active in my community. And A little more about me. So, my background, I run a small business in town, a local business that helps individuals with disabilities become independent. I have a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and a master's certification in mediation, which I know I will need if elected. So, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Roger. Just so you all know, the incumbent, Paul Amador, was invited, and he also was not able to attend tonight. And next up, we have also in District 2A for Representative Fritz Wiedenhoff.
Good evening. Thank you all for being here. I'd like to also thank my opponent for the opportunity to have a forum with him. I'd really like to thank all the audience, though, because I think that's why we're here. And when I look out, I see something that's really unique and really excites me, and is that I bet most of us are here because we haven't made up our mind. We've made up our mind we're voting for a Republican, which is great, as most everyone does in Kootenai County anyhow. However, what's really neat is to see the Republican voters here wanting to come, learn about the candidates, be engaged, and make informed decisions, which I think is really unique. I think one of the important things we can all talk about is we're all Republicans. We all support the similar things like we've heard out of each of us. But I'm more concerned about what's important to you, and I'm looking forward to the questions, particularly from the audience. But I think it's important to understand that's what I'd like to do, is go to Boise to represent you and find out what's important to you. When I go and knock on doors, that's some of the questions I ask. Folks will say, why are you running? Why do you do this? Well, I briefly tell them, I say, well, what's important to you? And I think that's where the people like yourselves, the voters, really need to re-engage and tell the elected officials and the candidates exactly why you want them to run and what you want them to focus on and where you want them to vote on things. And again, I'd like to thank the board, particularly the Property Owners Association and Lakeshore Owners Association in particular, for the opportunity to answer your questions.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for great opening comments. Now we're going to go to questions. Y'all will have 1 minute to give your answers. And Greg, let's start with you this time.
Well, since you're all here in the room to hear my last question, I'm going to change it up. And I kind of like what Vito was talking about with getting control over some of the regulation. I've been involved in a lot of different organizations for the last 20 years in Idaho, and I've seen a number of times where some of our agencies have gotten a little out of control. And I call it agencies run amok. And we have a lot of very dedicated people that work for Idaho government and work in our agencies, but they tend to be the people that are more zealous about their concerns have a tendency to get involved in those positions. And historically, the people sitting in the seats that you all aspire to are our avenue to try to take our concerns to state government. It's a little bit difficult to get the governor to listen sometimes. To take our concerns to them and get some of these agencies to do the bidding of the citizens, and more particularly of the legislature, rather than their own. So how would each of you address your ability, and tell me how you might try to keep the agencies from running amok on us?
All right, how to keep the agencies from running amok. Doug, why don't we go ahead and keep it in the middle format? And you got 1 minute, sir. Somebody get him a microphone, please. Thank you.
Is it on? Okay. So the first thing that comes to mind, I'm sad I only have a minute to talk about this, but I think there's far more opportunities to address those types of things. I don't think we really have to go looking for them too much. Last year, I got a parking ticket at Farragut State Park when I was putting my boat in, and the ticket on it referenced an IDAPA rule, and I looked it up, and the IDAPA rule did not say they could give me a ticket for that amount or for that thing, because I'd already paid my annual fee. So I guess in answer to your question, what would I do? I'd follow through, as I did with these folks, and I decided that we can't just let them decide what the laws are and make them up as they go. So I took them on and appealed to the board, and ultimately won, and they've changed their rule since then. So I think you just have to have somebody who's vigilant and will follow through. It's not glamorous, it's not sexy. but it does take persistence.
Thank you. I have about 10 stories going through my head right now that I would love to have the time, Mr. Adams, to tell you about.
I didn't set the format. I just have to enforce.
But let me quickly tell you about probably the bill that I think is the most important one that we have decided this year, and that is the Foster Care Improvement Bill. And I'll speak fast because there's a lot I want to tell you about, and I'm just going to tell you about one moment in time where the agencies all got together. There were a working group, so we had 2 interim committees that were legislative over the last 2 years. And at the end of that period of time, we still didn't have a piece of legislation on foster care. So a working group of us formed, and we brought in people from the Department of Health and Welfare, the judiciary branch, the public health districts, and I can't have the yellow already, and legislators, and we sat at a table and we talked about it, and let me tell you, all of these moms, all of their defenses came down, and we reached a conclusion and a resolution because we were real with each other and got over that agency business.
Thank you, Mary. Vito.
She's tough to rein in. I think the first order of recognition is that these people are not doing anything deliberately, but year by year, they're continuing to add to rules. One of the biggest frustrations that we have, we're reviewing the rules, but we don't review the entire rule. They've just struck out this part here and added that part here and then over here, and it's minor changes, or what appear to be minor. You read the rule and you go, wait a minute, we should be examining this whole thing. But we're not asked to do that. We're asked to just make these little changes. So the constitutional amendment that we solidified that power, where we're able to see that if these rules are to execute our statutes, the laws that we're passing, then we have a right to review those to make sure that they're doing what they should be doing. So, dollar bills, you've got to squeeze these agencies, and it takes more than 3 months to take care of this. We have to have interim committees that are dedicated to examine the whole rule.
Thank you, Vito. John.
Would anybody disagree with me that the purpose of government is to protect the lives, liberty, and property of the citizens that happen to be within that government's jurisdiction? That's it. So all these committees and all these extra regulations that we have, as Vito said, we have to examine them one by one and really determine if their purpose promotes the proper role of government. And if it doesn't, then that agency, that rule, that regulation needs to be eliminated. There are so many agencies that maybe don't start out as revenue generating programs, but in effect, that's what they become. We have extra rules and regulations and licenses because there are fees and taxes and costs that are associated with that, all of which increases the cost of government and deprives us, in many cases, of freedom, liberty, property. And that's my attitude toward all regulation.
Thank you, John. Next up, Tony.
First of all, we have to apply a little bit of business sense here. There's always a cost to any benefit, and we get so carried away with protecting the nth degree of a problem that we'll spend any amount of money on that, and it just doesn't make sense. When the Twin Towers were crashed into, me being an engineer, people said, well, why didn't you darn engineers design it so that it could survive a plane crash? I found out later it was designed to survive a 727 direct hit because that was in the design specifications. Now, what if we said it has to survive 50 simultaneous? I can design that for you, but you can't afford it. We have to get things under control and get some common sense and put up some priorities, and that's what it's going to take. We can't protect everybody from everything. Okay, that's my position.
Thank you, Tony. Kathy?
Thank you. In order to keep government smaller, I will tell you, when you're down there in Boise, and Mary talked about how many bills there are, I would say 80% of all the bills that are put before the legislature every year come from government, come from departments of government, wanting to increase their staff, wanting to increase their budget, most definitely. And so it takes that much time and that much effort to read through all those bills. My suggestion, and I've made it several years, I don't know who's listening, but would be to have the departments of government, because government loves to run government, but have them present their bills every other year. And every other year, it would be the people's government looking at your problems. Thank you.
Yeah, the agencies and the bureaucracy, that's the true swamp that, we as the it word over the last couple of years, these agencies, that's the growth of government. They're the ones who enact it. And a lot of times they're given quasi-judicial powers and legislation powers, as Kathy pointed out, that they're writing bills. And that takes away from the republic. I think that the piece of it is with the elected officials. That's what we would all be here to do, is to look at the laws and what is the best consequences of those laws, and then also the unintended consequences, where they need to be read in thoroughness, as Vito pointed out. And it's our job as elected officials to do that. We don't need the bureaucracy to be running our lives.
Thank you for that question. That's an excellent question. It's not the first time I've heard the question or comment about that, and actually that run amok phrase is one I've heard before come up about a lot of state agencies, and that's what we're talking about here as the legislative candidates, as the state agencies. I think we could all agree that there are some that at least could be, well, I don't know, I don't want to say scrutinized, but that would probably be an accurate description of what needs to happen. And possibly needs to happen from the top down. Maybe a list needs to be gathered, and it's over a 3-year period, because you couldn't do it all. I think, as some of the candidates have pointed out, you couldn't do it all in one session. Probably not even in 2 sessions. And maybe something like a list, maybe a bill from one of the legislators that says over the next 3-4 years, whatever, each state agency is going to be maybe go with a zero-based budget type of a thing to justify everything they do. And if they can, we don't need no government. We need effective, accountable, transparent government.
All right. Thank you, Fritz. And Fritz, you're right. That was an excellent question. Thank you, Greg, and excellent answers. Next up, we have Linda.
That was too close. Idaho has a lot of government-owned land within our borders. And with that has come some problems. We have poorly managed forests in the north. We have poorly managed grazing lands in the south. We have counties that struggle because they have no tax base, but yet they have to provide services, and the federal dollars of lieu tax money is rather inconsistent. What is your take on how we can better manage our federal ground, whether it be state management or whatever, all those problems that are involved that comes with federal land?
All right. Thank you, Linda. John, why don't we start with you? How to better manage the federal lands?
I think the biggest issue for me is the amount of waste that goes on. The federal government's forestry management plan seems to be let it burn, rather than harvesting the timber that they're supposed to be using for the benefit of the people of Idaho, specifically the schools. And I think that's something we've got to put a stop to. The federal government, everybody has a kind of the wrong notion of what the federal government's power is. As a landowner, they're just merely a landowner. They don't have any, just because of the federal government, doesn't mean they have a special power or control over land. If they're operating a nuisance that's affecting the state of Idaho, then the state of Idaho needs to take responsibility to say, this is a nuisance, we're going to step in and clear it up because you're not doing your job. But we just sit back and wring our hands and say, oh, poor us, there's nothing we can do, it's the federal government. We all probably will argue that the state needs to be managing those public lands, and I believe that as well, but we need to stop talking about it and start doing it.
Thank you, John.
This issue is continuing to gather momentum. I believe that the place to start is with the roads. We need to be able to have control of all of the roads and all of the forests and all of the federal land. If we have control of that, that gives us the inroads, so to speak, no pun intended, that we can begin to exercise our own power and control. One of the biggest problems we have, though, is this mindset that the federal law preempts state law. And the other aspect of this is the constitutional aspect, or the constitutional provision that basically says that this federal government would grant that back to us at a certain time in the future. It doesn't really matter. It's all ink on paper. We have got to get that changed so that we can gain control. If we can gain control, it will resolve so many issues. Public education funding, tax deductions, so many things would be affected if we could gain control of those resources. We're going to continue to fight that battle, and as more conservatives are elected, we're going to begin to win those battles.
Good timing, Vito. Thank you. I agree with what our first two gentlemen here said, but what I think of when I hear your question, Linda, is what Representative Mendive, who's way in the back, because he does not have a challenger, and he loves to tell the story about how his brother would fly him over the different forests, and he could tell from the sky, from the air, looking down, exactly where the state management of the forest stopped and the federal management of the forest began, because the federal managed forests were not healthy. And that's a detriment to all of us. And we've lived through these terrible fires, all of us. And we have seen literally, as Representative Barbieri said, going up in smoke were education dollars. Going up in smoke were dollars that we could have for a lot of the other state obligations that we have to lower our own tax burdens. And yet the federal government isn't letting us do as much management. So I do think that is the answer.
Well, Mary said it, or John said it, or somebody said it. We're all going to probably fall on the side of letting the state manage these federal lands. We think that's the best way to do it. I certainly do. You look at diseased trees, too much undergrowth for fire bombs that end up bleeding over into state lands. We're left with the cleanup job, and whether they intend it or not, we end up spending more fixing their problems than we would if we had control of that land. We could take care of those lands better and actually make some money off it. And there are just a ton of things we could do with those funds. So I don't really have much more to add. I think it's just that I'm on board. Let's get it done.
First of all, if you look at the history of our country, constitutionally, the federal government is allowed to own property, post offices, postal roads, forts, naval facilities, roads, and so forth. When the original colonies were founded, they had approximately 2 to 3% of their land area under federal ownership, federal control. If you look at the last state, Alaska, 99% is owned by the federal government. The average over the whole United States is about 24%. We're at 65% here in Idaho. If you look at that as a function of time, and I'm an engineer, I like to draw graphs, as the company has become more progressive, we have seen a higher and higher reneging of the federal government in turning over the lands that it controls, that the title should be extinguished and turned over to the state. So I'm not just in favor of controlling Idaho lands. I want ownership, and I think we can get there.
I think you'll find me in totally agreement with the rest of the folks, but I'm sure some of you remember the timber industry that we had here in the Northwest. My business was right across the street from a huge mill. But timber harvest is down 90% since the 70s. And 80% of our burned timber is on U.S. Forest Service and BLM land. So yes, they're right. That's our wealth up in smoke. So I would continue to work on managing our own Idaho lands. They actually give us 6 cents an acre for the land that they control. We deserve so much more. And I think with all the interest that's on it now and in Washington, D.C. with our folks as well, we'll get it.
You're not going to get any disagreement from me. As Tony stated, 65% of our lands in Idaho are under the control of the federal government. And when you look at our budget, over 30% of it comes from federal dollars. You know, we can decrease that if we have access, as Vito pointed out. Open up the roads. Give us, how do we manage it? Let us have it. That's how we would manage it. It's not just the timber industry. We have natural gas reserves that we're not allowed to tap into. I think maybe around 8% is what we're allowed to touch right now based on federal government laws. And again, that's money to Idaho. That's we could create jobs, increase revenue for education and other services to support our state. We have boundaries for a reason. It's Idaho boundaries, Idaho lands. We should have a say in what we do with them. Thanks.
Well, again, I think to speak to that, I don't think any of us are going to disagree on that. My understanding is some of this is already underway. Some of the Idaho management what's called a cooperative management with the Forest Service, with the federal government. And my understanding is it's been extremely successful. My understanding is it started out in its infancy with a sort of a test, we'll call it a test area, which was kind of small, and the federal government saw the kind of return they were getting and the quality of the work that was coming out. And that's increased and increased, and it's slated to keep increasing. While we can all agree, and I think we do, that we need to do something with the land ownership, that's not something that the Idaho legislature is going to resolve. Boise's not going to be able to resolve that. However, Boise can push and continue to push towards cooperative management that's effective, and not just with our forests, but our mining resources and our natural gas resources, our grazing land, and everything else.
All right, thank you. Another great question and great answers. Next question from Kim.
Well, Linda's question was so very similar to ours, but I've got another one. Now that a judge has handed down a ruling on the lawsuit involving Lake Coeur d'Alene and the watershed in and out of it, in which NWPOA and the Lake Association and some other organizations were a part of, what is your stance if the Idaho Supreme Court or another federal court agency were to side with the tribe and the federal government and grant them a win in appeal?
All right, why don't we start with Tony this time?
I'm certainly not a lawyer, so I don't know all the ramifications of that particular issue, but certainly until you get to the Supreme Court, there's always an appeal process. So without knowing more details, I would just want to make sure that we are properly legally represented and take it up to the highest appeal court in the land.
Well, I agree with those folks that said earlier that we let them gamble and they've got enough money to make all the lawyers they need. But what you also don't know, because I served on that water board for a while, is that their attorneys are paid for by the federal government. You're paying for their attorneys to take your water. And so I was most heartened by the last presidential election, as I'm sure all of you were. Under Hillary, it would have been unthinkable. I think quite possibly the feeling in the land, and especially in the West, is that we won't be controlled by the East and the government in the East, and that we're going to put our own wealth in the water because that's where it is. They want to breach all the dams now. We have to fight this every step of the way.
Absolutely. You know, it's not just about the tribe. As Kathy said, it's the federal government. You know, the fact that a district court in San Francisco gets to dictate what happens here in Idaho. You know, as if they understand our way of life or how we can manage our resources. And we've seen neighboring states fall into this trap as well. It may have to go to the Supreme Court, as Tony stated, and hopefully the fight continues. You know, I know Montana lost their fight. I don't know how that happened. Maybe they didn't, you know, fight hard enough. But I think there's a lot of people that are willing to do this, and it's important that we protect our watershed rights here in Idaho.
I'm assuming when you ask the question, you're referring to the Coeur d'Alene Spokane River Basin number 91 through 95, I would guess. I think we already have, we have at least a go-to appeal for sure, and we have an Attorney General who's fantastic, and we need to maybe put it in his hands with his staff, and if that, and maybe even some direction from the Chief Executive and/or the Legislature to ensure that it is appealed all the way that it could go up to the U.S. Supreme Court. I assume is probably going to be our last step with that.
Thank you, Fritz. John?
Well, if there's one thing I've learned practicing law for the last 25 plus years, it's that you don't try to guess what a court's going to do before they do it. Really, this is not something we can really even issue an opinion on what we think how we would respond if the appellate courts come back against Idaho. The bottom line is that it would be unconscionable and immoral and illegal and unconstitutional for anybody to come into Idaho and to try to deprive the people of the state of Idaho of their water rights. The problem is going to be that if the courts make a bad decision, and they do make bad decisions just like they did in the Dred Scott case, what are we going to do about it? What mechanism is Idaho going to use to enforce and protect our own property rights and our citizens against the federal government? Right now, we don't have a mechanism for that. There is a mechanism in the Constitution, and a lot of people hate to say the M word. It's called the militia, but that's the people of Idaho that say we're not going to be trampled on anymore, and it may come to that.
I would like to digress just for a moment. A man walked in here that's done more for this community than any other person here. Pastor Tim Remington just walked in the door, and I just want to appreciate what he's done for this community. Thank you, Tim. I've taken 30 seconds at least of my time. Oh, darn. I call him Mendive. Ron Mendive and I and Kathy Sims were instrumental in putting together the legislative resolution that assured that every single water rights owner, water rights claimant, and anyone that had anything to do, that had their own well or anything, had an opportunity to sit in and be a part of every single aspect of the water rights resolution. That whole thing was done. And it was a lot of work because there was resistance from the tribe and from the representatives of the tribe. And they had pretty not just talking about their lawyers, but it is shocking to be in those meetings and see who's really running it, which is the federal attorneys. The federal attorneys. So it's one thing for us to pass resolutions. It's another thing for us to fight for our water rights. If that's what it comes to, folks, that's what it comes to. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, to wrap this topic up, I really want you to know that as legislators, we've all been involved in this process with the adjudication, the water adjudication. And the resolution that Representative Barbieri refers to was before I got into the Senate, but I've been part of the meetings that have gone on, most of the meetings I've been able to get to. This is down in the southern part of Idaho, their water adjudications have gone on for almost 30 years before they were resolved. So here we are, and we're not that far into it. We're maybe 8 years into it at this point. But what we need to do is to stay the course and to hold the line on what our rights are. It behooves the tribe to resolve this issue with us because Washington State is our shared competitor, and we don't want Washington State to get our water rights.
Thank you, Mary.
No, you weren't the last one. Obviously, we want to exhaust all our legal remedies, right? So I would fully support doing that, but everybody's addressed this reasonably well. I don't think there's much more I can add to it other than to say, remember who you're voting for in a presidential election because they get to choose your Supreme Court justices. And so it may come down to that. And thank goodness, thank God, that Trump got elected. All right, that's it.
Thank you, Doug. All right, everybody, we've got about 10 minutes left in our forum. I think that'll just give us time for one more question. So panel, pick a good one.
Since we have such an influx of people moving into Idaho from more liberal states like California, how will you protect us from becoming another sanctuary state?
All right, Fritz, why don't we start with you and just bring it on down.
Well, I'm hoping, and I'm optimistically hopeful that whichever Republican nominee wins the governor's, to have his name on the ballot, will probably have the same feeling as the rest of us, that we do not want to become a sanctuary state. And I suspect that maybe some legislation needs to be in order, or at least a resolution, and maybe even a joint resolution from the legislature, strongly encouraging our chief executive of the state to ensure that doesn't happen.
I'm a transplant, so I mean the states, we have 50 states with open borders, and wherever you go, you speak the same language. That's one of the beauties of our. You don't need papers to go from state to state. That's one of the beauties of the system of the United States of America. This isn't America; it's the United States. So, as I stated earlier, I don't want Idaho to be homogenous in any way. I like that California's weird. California, you be weird. I like that. Idaho, let's keep Idaho. Idaho, you're welcome. Everyone's welcome here, as they are in any states. But there's a culture aspect, and I think our representatives can help preserve that culture, because a lot of times, especially in these states, we're going to get people who aren't who they say they are running for office. I'm running against one of them right now, to be honest with you. I don't think people need to have said that, but I'm going to say it. And so, it's like, hey, I'm going to put an R by my name, and I'm part of the culture of Idaho. No, it's not that way. You need people to represent you that actually believe and live the culture of the state of Idaho.
Well, I think the Idaho legislature would be not just a little bit firm on that issue. And I'm looking for more leadership coming from the governor's office. And if you know no one's going to veto what it is that you pass, it's a little bit easier to go to work on it. So keep Idaho's legislature a citizens' legislature. We're not professionals. All of us have another life that we lead, and businesses and retirements and other things that we do. So we live in the land that we try to rule and try to help. So keep Idaho legislature a citizens' legislature, and I think we'll be fine about that issue.
Both of my parents came from Poland. I am first-generation American. I have an older brother that was born in Liverpool. I am an American. I am not a hyphenated American. I'm not a Polish American. This business of adding these hyphenated terms does nothing but divide us. And I want to let you know that my parents were so proud of the country that they adopted that they forwent teaching us Polish in the home because they wanted us to be acculturated and assimilated into this nation. So I'm embarrassed to tell you that I don't know as much Polish as I sure wish I did. We have got to get our culture back under control. This is the melting pot, not a stew pot with a chunk of meat over here and a bunch of potatoes over there. And ultimately, the people that control what our immigration policy might be and sanctuary city status is all of you. You are the ones that pull the ballot and determine who gets elected with the right policies.
Okay, so I understand the issue. We're not talking about immigrants, people who come in legally. Perhaps it's legal, but it's not this traditional type of immigration like Tony's parents. I think these are Washington bureaucrats just deciding we're going to place these people in different places, and I'm opposed to that. Another understanding I have is that the governor has more to do with stopping that than the legislature does. So my advice to you, though I think most, if not all of us, would be firmly in support of stopping the influx of people to sanctuary cities or having them at all, you need to put your gubernatorial candidates on the spot on that issue. And that would be my recommendation to everybody.
Thank you. So if I understand your question correctly, it's what will we do to keep Idaho from becoming a sanctuary state? I can tell you there is no vision in the world that in my mind that Idaho could ever become a sanctuary state. I sit with the people in the legislature, half of them are carrying guns during the session. And I like to sit in between two of them. So no, there is absolutely no mind in the Capitol building for anything to do with sanctuary cities or states but I think that Doug makes a good point that it's the federal government who chooses to place refugees against the will of the state into the state. And so we need to increase our laws so that we can, as a state, assert our rights to say we will decide who comes in and when they come in and and how they are vetted.
I don't think the danger is for the state, but I do think that there are dangers for the individual cities, and that's where the state legislature has control, and if necessary, would pass legislation that would require that any state, even considering that, must conform to the state obligations and be totally disallowed. It is a complex issue because we're not just talking about an arm of the federal government, some agency that's placing them there, but we're looking at our congressional legislators saying, well, we don't have any control over that. And we're looking at the governor saying, well, we don't have any control over that. Everyone is pointing the finger back to the feds and saying, we don't have any control over that. Take control.
Well, I had a long time to think about this from the end of the table, and my first impulse was to kind of make a joke about it, because I have a lot of friends in this room that are from California, and the thing is, I realize the good ones stay. The crazy ones tend to go back pretty quick. But it's really a pretty serious matter. It's not just the sanctuary city issue. There are people that come to Idaho with a specific intent of changing Idaho into something it's not. They want us to be like every other place in the world. They want us to be not Idahoans, not Americans. They want us to be world citizens. So I guess the simplest way, how are we going to prevent this? No matter who goes to Boise next year that's sitting at this table now, the we includes all of us. And probably the most important thing I ever learned in civics class was the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. And if we don't stay vigilant, we're doomed. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, John. Thank you all. Let's give a big round of applause for the candidates. Let's get a round of applause for our timer, Summer. She did a great job. For our panelists, Kim, Linda, and Greg, thank you guys so much. Give all yourselves a round of applause. Good government requires active citizens. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. God bless you all.